take these three ideas of reason, science, and humanism, and say that beginning with the Enlightenment, there's been the goal of understanding the world and applying such knowledge to improve human flourishing, then one ought to enjoy progress. That is, sometimes we solve the problems that face us, we accumulate the solutions that work, and over time, human flourishing should increase. So that's the hope, and then one could ask, well, the Enlightenment ideal of progress sounds good in theory. How did that Enlightenment thing work out? Now, 200 years later, we can answer the question, and the question is: there's been enormous progress, and you can graph it, and I did. And to take just one example, through most of human history, life expectancy at birth was around 30. Today, in the developed world, it's greater than 80, and in the world as a whole, it's 71. And very, very few people guess that it's that high. So the ultimate good, the ultimate resource, life itself, has vastly increased.
Enlightenment thinkers were reformers relying on reason. If the world had gone awry, it was because humans did not heed the dictates of science. People instead followed the teachings of unreliable traditions and superstitions. They obeyed leaders who suppressed science and learning to keep people as ignorant servants. Was the Enlightenment, with its call to follow reason, a kind of revolution? Some thinkers were highly critical of the Church and its traditional teachings. Some criticized oppressive and irrational governments. Some were early feminists. Some even became critics of slavery, an institution supported by the very nations that played host to Enlightenment ideas. But there were limits to the revolutionary impact of Enlightenment thought. Why was that? We need to think of the identity and location of those we think of as architects of Enlightenment thought. The Age of Reason was an idea and a project worked on collaboratively between members of a growing upper middle class and the traditional European aristocracy. John Locke in England, Immanuel Kant in Prussia. Both relied on the support and patronage of those with wealth and power. Frederick the Great of Prussia was among a group of rulers referred to as enlightened despots. They sought to maintain authoritarian rule while authorizing liberal, scientific learning. Enlightenment thinkers might challenge intellectual authoritarianism, but there was often a limit to how far they would push for political reform. Kant, for example, said that citizens and scholars ought to be able to have free, unrestricted public exchanges, while leaders could appropriately demand complete obedience to the state and church. Kant might have learned from a distinction made by Martin Luther more than 200 years before. Luther said humans stand under two governments. The spiritual government, overseen by God, is the place of freedom and human equality. The inner realm of faith characterized by a kind of spiritual egalitarianism. Here, all are siblings in Christ. Alongside the spiritual government is a government that relates to humans' outer, bodily, or social reality, the temporal government. God oversees this government also, but human representatives of God's rule carry out the earthly task of maintaining peace and order by requiring obedience. These are the fathers, other guardians, and rulers who are to secure human welfare. In this government, freedom and equality are not guaranteed, since peace and order require that people recognize their proper places and their obligations to each other, to superiors and inferiors. So, for Luther, Christians stand under these two kinds of rule, one characterized by freedom, and another characterized by obedience. Kant proposed a similar binary when he argued that human societies can have both free inquiry and expression and compliance with institutional authority. Like Luther's spiritual government, Kant said that reason could be public. All citizens have an innate gift, the endowment of reason, that should put them on an equal footing and entitle them to think clearly and critically, and to speak freely. But Kant said that reason could also be private. Like Luther's claim about the temporal government, Kant said that when we are acting as servants of church or state, we can be told to bracket our critical thinking and comply with the institutional demands of our leaders. Kant outlined a path for critical reason to make progress within limits. Reason and science could operate to expand knowledge and reform society, but they would be partly domesticated by leaders who need to keep peace and maintain order. If this was revolution, it was not a radical revolution. It would not quickly transform society or politics. But there was another obstacle to Enlightenment revolution, a contradiction that went to the heart of the fixation with the power of reason. Reason was an uplifting force, one that was universal, potentially all-seeing, unaffected by time and place, absolutely objective, non-prejudicial, above the limits of any particular culture. And yet, virtually all the designers of Enlightenment thought were male and European, or of European descent. Would the fact of their gender, class, national and cultural identity have any impact on what they, using their reason, saw and thought and wrote? To us, today, the answer seems obvious. Of course, their location influenced their perception, their thinking. But the claim of Enlightenment reason was different. Its power lay in the conviction that what was eternally true, right, and good was graspable by the objective knowing of the thinkers of the Enlightenment movement, those who modeled a scientific and critical approach to which we all can aspire. When we discover that some of these influential thinkers looked at their world and saw an ordered system that just happened to place their kind at the summit of intelligence, ability, and natural talent, a world in which nature decreed their superiority, we will likely conclude that it was their bias, rather than objective reason, that created that vision. But that biased view was not exposed as bias in their time. Instead, it was wrapped up in the language of truth and science, the rhetoric of what disinterested, neutral investigation makes clear and obvious to all. And that is a part of the dynamic, according to which the potentially revolutionary movement of the Enlightenment contributed to the modern project of white supremacy.